All right. I'm going to look at social implications and then wind it down and talk, as Schumacher said, economics as if people mattered. I think we forget in our ivory tower. I live in one of those where I talk charts, graphs, and numbers, etc. And I decided, let's go right brain, because we've had a left brain day all day. I don't know about you, but at the end of the day, I can't handle left brain anymore. Well, I've got to be careful what I say here. But so I decided, initially I started with charts and graphs, and I thought, okay, let's do pictures and movie clips and talk about what is it that we're really talking about. What are the implications of the theories, of the agreements, of the disagreements, of what it is that happens? The world very much is involved in what we're doing. Here's a quote by John Maynard Keynes: "The ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and, sad to say, when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else." I wouldn't want to say that, but I think we'll let the past Mr. Keynes say that. That's really ultimately what the implications are all about, right? I think we forget in our discussions the fact that the decisions that we make here in this building, here in this group of people, affect the lives, well, in our case, of 310 or 20 million people, however many we are today. And globally, the effect that the Fed and that the U.S. has on policy all over the world. And Jeff Sachs said that very clearly, where he's saying, look, the decisions that we end up making have huge effects on everybody else. All right? Well, a lot of those effects are hidden. 90% of what we talk about is underwater. We don't tend to see it very easily. Well, I don't know, I speak for myself. I know when I sit down for dinner and I try to explain something to somebody, the first thing I do is get a napkin out and draw some parabolic chart or something, because that's how my brain thinks. But that's not what that's not what this is really all about. So, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. Logic will get you from A to B. Some really famous person said that, like Albert Einstein. But imagination will take you everywhere. And that's what I'd like to do for just a few minutes at the end of the day today. All right? Because when we get it wrong, as John Maynard Keynes just said, the implications are phenomenal. Okay? Here's a shot from Greece. I don't think I need to say anything, do I? Here's a shot from Cyprus. These are people withdrawing their, what is it? I think it's 300 euros a day. Wow, can't you live off that forever and ever? How would you like to be a company and meet payroll on 300 euros a day? Thank you, you're bankrupt, just like that. You do realize we now have two, let's not get into the fancy stuff. We now have two different kinds of euros, you know that, don't you? There's the euro that's in what we think is the euro, and then there's the euro that's in Cyprus. It's not a real euro anymore, because you can't take it out. Can't go anywhere with it. Anyway, let's not, that's, we've had all day of those kind of things. I'm talking, well, those are the kind of consequences that our decisions and our discussions and what it is that we talk about, that results in bank lines. That results, sad to say, in suicides. That results in riots on the street. So what I did in that great underwater portion of the iceberg that you saw, I decided to take just a few bits and pieces of what could have been handled. I probably left 80% out, all sorts of things that have been mentioned today, and I thought, let's just have a look at a few of them. All right, here's what I would say. Here's our monetary system, our banking system. All right. So what it is, it's this huge monolith, menhir, and it's standing on a point. All right? It's very unstable. Now you notice we've created some really nice rocks here at the bottom. So these are stability systems that are part of what it is that we've created. That's the FDIC. That's, all sorts of regulatory constructions that we've created that help to stabilize this block. All right? But we've got these big guys. I'd say this is the Fed here in the United States that is working to stabilize a highly unstable system. And I am in a Fed building, and I want to praise them because I think they've done a phenomenal job for a system that I would consider as inherently unstable. And essentially, everybody has said that today. You have heard that. We may disagree on different policies, systemic issues, whatever. We've all agreed the system is highly unstable. So we've got these guys. They've done a good job. I mean, this is the 100th anniversary. Wasn't it 2013 the Fed was created? It's the 100th anniversary. And it's not that we haven't had any problems, but by and large, I can't believe how few problems we've had, considering the essential nature of what the system looks like. Well, let me show you another thing about this picture. Those are all human beings. Those are little people down there. They actually cover everything, but then of course the whole picture wouldn't make any sense. When that big monolith falls down, it crushes those people. And that's what we're talking about today. It's a very important subject. Let's talk about social inequality. Remember, I'm zipping through this really fast. Here's a paper written by one of our very own, member of the GIC, John Sylvia, chief economist of Wells Fargo. So we don't have to go very far to look at social inequality. So here's the abstract from the paper. We study the effects and historical contribution of monetary policy shocks to consumption and income inequality in the United States. And the same can be said essentially for the whole world. Contractionary monetary policy actions systematically increase inequality in labor earnings, total income, consumption, and total expenditures. Let's see now, what part of the economy is missing here? There must be something missing. No, there isn't anything missing. Furthermore, monetary shocks can account for a significant component of the historical cyclical variation in income and consumption inequality. Using detailed micro-level data on income and consumption, we document the different channels via which monetary policy shocks affect inequality, as well as how these channels depend on the nature of the change in monetary policy. What it says is, when people are doing everything correctly, the system, inherently the system itself, creates inequality. I can be the most wonderful, godly, whatever you want to call it, person in the human, of the human race, and yet the system itself, in the actions that I'm part of, create inequality. We don't think about that, do we? We think it's just evil people, or we think it's just somebody making some wrong decision, or we think it's just, no, that banker, he's not willing to lend me money, or that person, he defaulted on his loan, or no, if everything is done correctly, the system inherent in itself creates inequality. And inequality ultimately is very, very dangerous to our society. Now, I'm not advocating, I'm definitely not a communist, not a socialist, and we have strong elements of our society that are very pushing strong for redistributionism. All right? Why are those elements of society there? Maybe because we have problems with the structure of the system. Let me run you a clip.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change, and the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own, because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money. But do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
Now, this is a conference on banking. It's not a conference on social equality. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that the banking system creates all that inequality. I think that would be patently wrong. All I'm saying is that, like I said, even our very own agrees that the very banking system that we have is a significant part of a social problem that we do need to deal with. There are a whole bunch of other things. We've talked about application of business cycles. We talked about debt, private, government, etc. Let's just leave those. I want to talk about banking complexity and paradigms. Here, I'll entertain you for just a few minutes. Hopefully you'll enjoy this. Let's start with something very shocking. These are clips out of the movie Longitude. If you've not seen it, I strongly suggest you see it. It's a really powerful movie. It's a true story of John Harrison and how he developed a method of determining longitude. I'm giving things away before they even start. That's terrible. What happened is in the 16 and 1700s, Britain ruled the seas, as you know, and they realized that they were losing hundreds of ships every year and thousands of sailors because they jolly well didn't know where they were. And so latitude is not a problem. North-south, you know, the sun, we can tell. If you know the day of the year it is, you know how high the sun is, you can pretty well tell where you are north-south. Longitude, folks have done work. You haven't got a clue where in the world you are. So sailors died of scurvy. They hit reefs. They just didn't know where they were. And so in 1714, the British Parliament set up what they called the Board of Longitude, and they issued a prize of £20,000. That's, I can't remember, that's about like $5 million today. It's a very significant prize. And they said, can anybody figure out how to do this? All right? And along came all sorts of people. Here's a 1-minute clip, roughly, that shows you how serious they took this and the consequences if you diddled with it.
On the 22nd of October, 1707, Admiral Sir Cloudesley Shovel summoned the captains of the British fleet to his flagship, the Association. That morning, he had ordered the execution of an able seaman.
The navigation of His Majesty's ships is the sole concern of His Majesty's officers.
The crime was keeping a private reckoning of the ship's position and publicly disputing the Admiral's calculation.
Ball of bloody twine! Every damned instrument in the possession of any seaman on any ship under my command confiscated. Any further questioning of our position will be treated as an act of mutiny and dealt with accordingly. That clear?
Well, the nice thing is I don't think we're going to be hung by the Fed or by anybody else by looking at alternatives to the system. That's really what this sailor was attempting to do, and that's why I showed you the little clip. It was pretty deadly in those days. I think we're not quite there. What happened is John Harrison was a simple carpenter who thought he figured this out, which is to create a clock that was accurate to within at least a second a day. And if you could create a clock that would actually work on board of a ship. They couldn't even do that on land, sitting still, but with all the rocking, rolling, twisting, turning, all the yawing that was going on to create a clock that could do that, lo and behold, the ships would know where they were. This was a simple carpenter. What I'm going to do is because we're running late, I'm going to cut the next one really short. He goes before the Naval Board and asks for permission to take his clock on board ship and have it officially tested. Let's do the last 30 seconds here, roughly.
Mr. Harrison requests permission to come aboard.
Permission granted.
Good, I'll fetch him. Steady, sir. Give me a roll.
Mr. Harrison, Lieutenant Bertie.
Lieutenant.
Captain Proctor presents his compliments and advises you to stow your machine in the great cabin.
Has he seen it yet?
I don't think so. Good God.
Steady there! Please ask your men to be careful, Lieutenant.
Don't worry, Mr. Harrison. This is the Navy.
Steady there. Get that whip off her! Campbell. Take Mr. Harrison to the great cabin with his clock while I report to the captain.
Aye, aye, sir.
I want to draw an analogy, and I want to say our banking system today is like John Harrison's clock. You know, about a meter cubed, and takes a crane to lift this thing up on board ship, because he had pendula going against springs, going against wheels, going against you name it. and every single motion needed a slightly smaller counter motion, and a counter motion against that, and a counter motion against that, and a counter motion against that. It is said that he made over 200 adjustments. Why do you think this thing weighed like that? How would you like to today walk around with your wristwatch that is 1 cubic meter and weighed, beats me, you know, half a ton? Wouldn't work, would it? So what we needed was a paradigm shift. I want you to listen to the words of what's happening here. This is an analysis done in the 30s, and there's a speech given. Again, it's a very short clip. And what in the world happened?
See you next week.
What are you doing?
I mean to make another.
But the third is almost ready. We cannot afford to be distracted now.
You've seen how the watch has performed in the test. It's not perfect. But what if I could make it so? What if I could make a timepiece no bigger than the span of a man's hand that could be taken to sea? Now, wouldn't that be a practical solution?
Harrison's fourth machine, by reason alike of its beauty and its accuracy, must take pride of place as the most famous chronometer that ever has been or ever will be made. But the journey from his third machine, which you see behind me, to his fourth, thank you, is one of the most extraordinary mysteries of horology. Faced as he was by a seemingly insuperable problem of centrifugal forces, Harrison took a daring and lateral leap. It is as though an aeronautical engineer suddenly ceased development on a new aircraft and instead adapted the technology to make his bicycle fly to France. H4, as I've come to call it, resembles a large silver pear-case watch, about 5 inches in diameter. Indeed, it seems to have been designed for the daily wear in the pocket of some Brobdingnagian. At the moment, it's not working, but that is a state of affairs that I hope very shortly to do something about.
We should be finishing work on our third machine, not wasting time on this deck watch.
Wasting our time?
The machine is almost ready for its sea trial. And we've not had time to conduct a 28-day test on this watch, let alone 3 or 6 month trial.
I'll go when I'm ready, another Thor.
Then we need to apply for more money. We cannot survive any longer than what we have.
That watch worked, and in a massive paradigm shift, he went from this 1 meter machine to invent the mechanism that you and I have on our wrist today, if it's not electronic. We still use, all mechanical watches today, use the very method that Harrison, this simple country carpenter, invented. Took him 40 years, and you saw the things that he built before. Why am I telling you this? I wanted to take you on a journey of our banking system and the paradigm shift that I believe we need to move from a crane 1-ton machine to a wristwatch. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I believe it's possible. I really do. Oops, oh, that says the wrong thing. It says change is not possible. I've been told that. As I told people what this conference was all about, I had a banker say to me, Uli, it's impossible. And I go, really? Here's an interesting chart. What this goes, you're going to have trouble reading it, goes from 1780 until essentially today, and maps out the major banking regulatory changes that have occurred over the last 200 years. Okay? It's not like we have not created major changes before. It's not like history has not seen events that demanded significant decisions. Why is today different? Today it's impossible. I know they could do that 50 years ago, or they could do that when we went off the gold standard, or they could do that when we created the Federal Reserve Bank. Oh, we could do all those things, but today that's not possible. Something wrong with us, I guess. Yeah, we're the todayans. Todayans can't do these things anymore. I just want to show you something that's kind of interesting. If we were to draw a graph, where's my pointer here? If you look at the number of changes, it's essentially a parabolic curve. The closer we get today, the more changes have been created. Right? I want to tell you, we can still do it. As you see at the bottom, we have a history of making good corrections. Let's keep it up. Thank you very much.